Rolling?
Yep.
Okay, my talk today is about a volcano in Iceland, which I can't pronounce, so listen up.
Eyjafjallajökull.
That's the name of the volcano. And I've called it an unpronounceable pain in the ash. That's the title of my talk. So they may not be able to say its name, but anybody flying into or from Europe in the past couple of weeks has had good reason to curse this volcano. The trouble started last summer, actually, with some seismic activity, and then there was a small eruption earlier in the year. But on around April 14th of this year, the trouble really began. There was a second eruption, a little bit bigger, and it occurred under the glacier. Now, that might seem like a good thing, lots of ice to keep the volcano cool. Unfortunately, all that ice-cold water running down into the volcanic eruption chills the lava, forming tiny pulverized fragments of glass, which are then ejected high into the atmosphere on the volcanic plume. And is this stuff good for airplane engines? No, not so much. If it gets sucked into airplane engines, it grinds up the internal parts and gums them up and melts and causes all kinds of problems. So people don't like to fly through this stuff. So the civil aviation authorities in Europe closed the airspace and said nobody can fly. And at least commercial flights. If you were some little plane putting along, still no problem. But so this went on until around April 20th. And it's still affecting a little bit, but part of what happened was that they canceled 95,000 odd flights, stranded 5 million travelers and various, students that couldn't get back to the UK for their exams, all kinds of mess. The trains and ferries all filled up with passengers that were close enough to still get someplace that way, and it was all just kind of a big mess. And the airlines lost a ton of money, and they blamed the governments. Oh, you shouldn't close the airspace, it wasn't really a problem. But some military jets did fly during this to try and see what was going on, and suffered some pretty heavy engine damage. Fortunately, nobody actually crashed as a result. So the inconvenience seems pretty big, but it's worth noting that the last eruption of this volcano lasted for over a year. So the couple weeks we've had haven't been so much of a big deal so far. And as annoying as this may be, to look at some older eruptions of volcanoes in Iceland, for example, the Loki volcano, which erupted the last time in 1783, and this was known as the mist hardships in Iceland. Livestock deaths were catastrophic. It killed 80% of sheep and 50% of cattle and horses. Human casualties were 20 to 25% of the population, mostly from either famine or fluorine poisoning, which wasn't real good. That eruption emitted 120 million tons of sulfur dioxide, and that's 3 times the annual industrial output of Europe in 2006. So that was a lot of sulfur dioxide, which is not really good stuff. What about Loki's effect outside of Iceland? I mean, it was clearly pretty awful in Iceland. An unusual high-pressure system over Iceland brought the wind towards Europe. In the summer of 1783, it was the hottest on record. Poisonous clouds spread over parts of coastal Europe and contributed to thousands of deaths. There was fog so thick that the fishing boats couldn't leave port, and the sun was described as blood-colored for most of the summer. This was followed by a severe winter in 1784 in the Americas that was so cold that there was ice skating in Charleston Harbor, if you can believe that. And there was ice in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mississippi River froze over at New Orleans in the winter of 1784. There's also some evidence that Loki weakened African and Indian monsoons, which contributed to a drought because of lessened rainfall in the Nile River that killed 1/6 of the population of Egypt that year. So back to the present day. Iceland has at least one other volcano worth worrying about, called Katla. And it's has a crater 6 miles in diameter and has erupted approximately every 40 to 80 years. It's partly covered by a 230 square mile glacier. It's had a couple of eruptions recently, well, recently being a relative term. In 1755, it had an eruption under the glacier that melted enough ice to cause a flood that was 7 to 14 million cubic feet per second of water. And to put this in some comparative thing that you might understand, that's more than the combined flow of the Amazon, Mississippi, Nile, and Yangtze rivers all put together. All three eruptions of Eyjafjallajökull in the last 1,000 years have triggered an eruption of Katla, so you might be looking for that. So all the various air travelers that are worrying about their inconvenience, should put things in perspective. It could be much, much worse.
Yeah.